Well, hello and welcome to another innovation series session. Again, as part of the innovation series, we're here to talk about everything that's related to new science and research within the world of food allergy. And today we have a very special guest based on his role within the Healthy Baby Initiative, Worldwide Disease Accelerator within Janssen Research and Development, which is part of the J&J Janssen pharmaceutical companies. It's my pleasure to welcome Dr. Richard Insel.
Well, a pleasure to be here. Thanks for the invite.
So, Dick, this is really actually a joy for me to have you on. So we've been doing these innovation series talking about different aspects of research and science and food allergy. Just for the audience's benefit, I've known Dick for going on over 10 years. Before I had a child with food allergies or had anything to do with food allergies. And just to let the audience know that Dick has been incredibly important to me in terms of my professional career and everything that I've been involved in and in my pursuit in innovating and helping push on innovation within the world of food allergy. So the fact that I get to sit here with you after having all this professional and personal mentoring in my career is a real joy, because you don't come from the world of food allergies per se, and you're here talking about how we're going to change the world in terms of prevention and disease interception. So that's extremely fascinating and exciting.
Well, thanks. And let me say, it's a pleasure for me to be here as well. And I've learned a lot from you over the years, so it's very mutual.
Well, thank you for that. So in terms of, I rattled off of these world, Healthy Baby Initiative, Worldwide Disease Accelerator. You are the global head of this business unit within J&J. Can you describe what this is and what this group is all about within the broader organization?
Yeah, let me just step back. I'm part of what's called the World Without Disease Accelerator. And this is a relatively new group at Janssen. And it was formed really based on the vision of Bill Hite. Bill ran R&D at Janssen for about 8 years. And he came to the conclusion that in the future, we're going to be able to predict who's at risk of developing disease. And if we could do that, and if we had the right interventions, we could target those individuals and prevent disease ever beginning in those individuals. Or if disease was incubating in those individuals, but yet was not symptomatic, we could stop it or intercept it, so-called secondary prevention in its course. If disease occurred, the only thing that would be allowed on the table was a cure. No treatment, no chronic treatment, but truly a cure. Take it off the table. And based on that vision, he spun out this World Without Disease Accelerator. And today, there are several ventures. We have what's called the Type 1 Diabetes Venture. We have a colorectal cancer venture. Separate, but quite related, is our lung cancer initiative. And then the newest venture is this Healthy Baby venture that I head up. And we're only about 2 years old. We were founded just in 2019.
Okay, so just to really take a step back there, this is a group within a very large research and development organization focused historically on drug treatment, vaccines, and other biopharmaceutical R&D. And the leadership from this group and this company, a global leader within this field, has decided to invest in what you just called disease intervention, prevention, or curative therapies. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's great. But I got to point out, this is a small part of a very large healthcare company. And it's really based on the concept, as you look to the future, we're going to need to do different models, different approaches. And with healthcare dollars going up, prevention is going to become really critically important. There's no question about it. And thus, this is an attempt not just to prevent like infectious diseases that we've prevented in the past, but other kinds of diseases, the chronic inflammatory diseases, allergic disease, autoimmune disease, and so on. So it's a very different way of thinking. And the idea is keeping it in a small incubator-like model. We can be more nimble, more agile, and we'll take things through proof of concept. After that, we'll shun it over to the sectors, whether that be pharma, the R&D side, of the organization, or consumer health, or medical devices.
So I asked that question in that way because, I've worked within this field for a very long time. My professional history is in drug R&D, and obviously when it comes to prevention or curative solutions, those are very rare within the industry. One, because they're very hard to achieve. And of course, we've had some successful history in the vaccine and infectious disease world. But chronic disease, the big costs and source for our healthcare dollars going forward, this is an area that has not been historically addressed. And taking on such a challenging area, I think, needs to be commended and lauded, because this is new, which is why it fits in within an accelerator and almost in an incubator type of environment within the organization.
Yeah, it's challenging. It's an experiment, okay, and yet it's risky. There's no question about it. But the rewards are tremendous. I mean, obviously, if we can prevent a child from developing food allergy, or prevent a child who's even sensitized to the food allergens from developing clinical allergy, that would be interception. Or if somebody has food allergy, taking it off the table so that they could eat ad lib and not have to take, let's say, chronic, allergen immunotherapy, et cetera. Those are home runs. And so, yeah, we're being very ambitious here. But the thinking is that today, for certain diseases, we've gained a much greater insight into the scientific basis of those diseases. We're better understanding the root cause. And what we're going to do will be grounded based on science. And we're going to really create approaches that are underpinned by good science. And we're going to address areas where there's a tremendous unmet need.
Okay, so first off, we're going to talk about all of that in a second. I want to understand your perspective and the group's perspective in terms of how we might go about doing that. And I will talk about your background a little bit, because it's relevant in terms of lessons learned and where you've come from, and that perch and how it's being applied to this area that we care about within food allergy and pediatric atopy for this discussion, I think is very enlightening for myself and for the audience. But before we do that, you mentioned other areas that this group is focused on: colorectal cancer, lung cancer, type 1 diabetes. Mm-hmm. And these are areas that, like it or not, for us as a community, have had a lot more R&D dollars go into it in terms of the genetics and understanding the disease and the natural history. And we're just, we're behind, as we've often talked about in food allergy. And what we're trying to do is accelerate that and catch up. So can you maybe speak to why did this become one of the other areas within that list of disease, or therapeutic focus that, why does it belong within that same group of, scientific discovery?
Yeah. So when Healthy Baby was rolled out in 2019, the vision was to prevent, intercept early childhood disease. We looked at many different diseases, and the criteria that we looked at were based on unmet clinical need, science, making sure that we really had a pretty good understanding of root cause. And thirdly, did we have potential or prospects for interventions to prevent or intercept? And we decided the first group of diseases to go after were childhood allergic disease, atopic dermatitis, and food allergy. And obviously, we can talk about that, how they're connected. Recently, we've also added celiac disease to the list. But our main focus today is childhood allergic disease, in good part because of the huge need here, and because we think we can really gain some traction and really have some inroads around such. And we can talk about why. Yeah.
And is it fair to say that you were part of that decision-making process and assessing those different therapeutic areas and opportunities?
I was, and in fact, I really campaigned for the Healthy Baby Initiative for a period of time before it was really adopted and accepted.
Okay, and I now have to do this, Dick, and I know you don't want me to do this, but I'm going to give people a little bit of insight into your background and what you did before you had this role within the taking on this global head position of the Healthy Baby Initiative. So prior to this job, you were the chief scientific officer for JDRF, where you were part of really transformational research initiatives within the world of type 1 diabetes, both within the public sector and working with the private sector to advance innovation for that disease population. I should mention that we had Cynthia Rice on as one of our guests of this series because we wanted to learn from how JDRF has been able to operate as a nonprofit foundation and really advancing prevention and similar type of solutions within that field. And as part of that, we talked about TrialNet and some of those large clinical trial studies that were so foundational to that science. You were a steering committee member for that TrialNet study and for everything related to that and driving that forward during your time at JDRF. And I just wanted to mention that because we'll come back to some of the lessons learned from that experience. Prior to JDRF, you were a founding director of the Center for Human Genetics and Molecular Pediatric Disease and professor of pediatrics, microbiology, and immunology at the University of Rochester Medical Center. You're acting chair of pediatrics there and chief of the Division of Pediatric Immunology, Allergy, and Immune Response. And finally, something that you and I have not talked a lot about, you're a co-founder and board member of Praxis Biologics, which was responsible for advancing the Hib vaccine. That's correct?
Correct. Yeah.
And for those that don't know what the Hib vaccine is, the Hib vaccine became the first vaccine to be used in infants universally since the vaccines for measles and mumps. Praxis Biologics was responsible for advancing that vaccine. And that in Hib, just to let people know, prevents the bacterial cause for pediatric meningitis. And that killed a lot of kids, or a good number historically. Today, because of the universal Hib vaccine, we've nearly eradicated infant and pediatric meningitis in this country and in many countries globally. So we've never really talked about that, but your contribution to just overall society, I just wanted to say thank you, and wanted to recognize your role in foundational, impactful research that has prevented and essentially have cured diseases, much like the way you're trying to do now in chronic disease.
Well, thanks. Let me say the Hib vaccine, this was a group effort. There were multiple individuals involved. I was part of a larger team. But you're correct. I mean, I think it really illustrates what we did for infectious diseases in the 20th century. We believe here in the 21st century, we're going to be able to do for the same thing for some of these chronic diseases. That is, prevent them. I don't think we'll eradicate, we don't talk about eradication per se for these diseases. And the only disease that's been truly eradicated is smallpox. But I think we can really develop some novel approaches to prevent some of these chronic diseases based on really some new understanding of gut microbiome, skin microbiome, and so on. We could talk about that. So I think we have some really interesting tools, some new insights that will lead to transformational approaches to prevent disease.
Yeah, well, I love that narrative of going from preventing or curing infectious disease, acute conditions otherwise. So going from the acute to the chronic. And from a global perspective, obviously there has been a lot of nonprofit research going into the acute and infectious disease side of the equation. But those developing countries are also going to be afflicted by the same chronic diseases that afflict us in Western countries. So this chronic conditions are absolutely a part of the problem globally in terms of global health, not just here in our country. And that movement from thinking about acute, solutions for acute and now moving to chronic, I think is a wonderful narrative in terms of how you advance what we're trying to do with innovation and science more broadly.
Well, you're correct. Let me say more people die from NCDs, non-communicable diseases, around the world than infectious diseases today. So whether that be cardiovascular disease, related to obesity, diabetes, and so on. And WHO realizes this, the World Health Organization realizes this, and they are putting a lot more resources into such. And you can see also the impact of these diseases really with the COVID epidemic, how comorbidities are affecting mortality rate with respect to COVID.
That's right. And I think that's it just speaks to that this notion of moving towards these types of solutions for chronic disease isn't just a single incubator effort within this organization, but you are really building on something that is happening more, within our industry, within this country, and globally as well in terms of trends and needs. So the reason I had to say that all about you and your background is because that history in terms of what you've done and contributed both on the vaccine side, but also at JDRF in terms of, another chronic disease that afflicts a young population and carries on all the way through adulthood, obviously. Yeah. What can you tell us just broadly from the lessons learned? Beyond what we just talked about, what are the other lessons learned or similarities that you see from what you did there to what could be potentially possible within our world of allergy and atopy?
Yeah. So let me jump onto the topic of foundations. You mentioned JDRF, and that's for your audience. It stands for the Juvenile Diabetes Research Foundation. They did change the name. And that medical foundation was focused and still is focused today on prevention, treatment, and cure of type 1 diabetes, which does affect both children and adults. And I think, you ask yourself, what is the role of a foundation such as FAIR, or in this case, in your case, and all of our case, and JDRF? And I think there's several roles. One is foundations should really be addressing gaps and be very mindful of gaps and jump in where they see gaps. They could be scientific gaps. The field may need new tools. It may need new talent, and it's tools and talent that often really drive transformation and real change. It may be gaps with respect to translating a particular research development. The individuals who do basic discovery research are not always the best individuals to translate that research. At times, you're going to need a multidisciplinary approach to certain problems. And there, a foundation can bring together like-minded individuals who want to work together on a particular problem. And then we know, as you look at the development of therapies, and that one of the major challenges is just getting funding during that valley of death in early startups where they really have a negative cash flow. And that's where a foundation can also step in with respect to propping those startups up and getting them across and bridging, that valley of death. And then I think the other thing that Cynthia Rice probably talked about in great detail that a foundation can really do is address and really precondition at the back end, the regulatory side of things, making sure that there's really clarity on the regulatory pathway that's critically important for companies, so we're not delayed in getting regulatory approval. And then there's the whole issue of payers and affordability, and the whole issues of adoption. And what we did at JDRF, and Cynthia Rice illustrates this, I think, quite well, and I think the foundation does today, is really address that whole spectrum, that whole gamut, from soup to nuts, from early discovery all the way to getting into the hands of patients. Because at the end of the day, the success factor is what has gotten to patients. That's really what it's all about. And how do you really streamline that as quickly as possible and take away those barriers and mind those gaps? That's what foundations can do.
Right, and I want to commend that organization, GDR, for speaking about here, and our interactions when you were there, and I observed how much that patient voice drove really the entire mission and strategy for that organization. Much like the way that FAIR is trying to integrate that patient voice and be that platform for all those stakeholders that you're talking about. And again, I think that is the model that. Because of the success in terms of doing that and bringing those solutions now, closer and closer to market, or have been innovated and have been brought to market, it really speaks to the power of what you can do as, it takes more than one, right? You really need all of these groups to work together to achieve some of these really hard tasks. So thank you for speaking about that, because I think just with that experience, it really just gives hope and enthusiasm to what is potentially possible here. The amount that you've championed for what could be done here, given your experience elsewhere, I think really builds the credibility of where this field is going and what we could do together. Could you speak to that a little bit in terms of what you do see as the future within this field? I mean, you have this broad, big, ambitious mission. Where do you see it going? I mean, we don't need to talk about any specific one opportunity per se, but as the world starts to continue to push in this area, what do you think will emerge over time?
Yeah. So with respect to food allergy, I mean, let's just talk about some of the science, that's happened in some of the clinical trials. I think some of your listeners appreciate that we had what was called the LEAP trial that demonstrated that consuming peanut, starting between 4 to 11 months of age, up to 5 years, versus avoiding peanut, provided an 81% prevention of clinical peanut allergy, a peanut allergy at 5 years of age. So that taught us, and not only did it work in individuals who were not sensitized, but individuals who had low levels of sensitization had about a 70% prevention outcome. So that really has taught us that we can train the immune system if we expose the immune system through the GI tract, through the gut, by feeding at an early age potential allergens to infants. And that obviously was followed by the EAT study and several other studies and several other ongoing studies, including the SEED study that FAIR is funding and supporting at Northwestern here in the United States. That's starting eating early diet, SEED, to really, and that particular study is not just peanut, but it's multiple foods that are being introduced. So this has really given us, I think, some really interesting insights as far as how to train the immune system. But I think we've gone further. We're beginning to understand what is happening behind the scene. What does it mean to train the immune system? What does it mean to have healthy immune education? We're learning how the immune system generates what we call regulatory T cells that patrol the body and prevent adverse response to food antigens, allergic responses to food antigens. And in most individuals, this is successful. And in fact, when it comes to milk and egg allergy, certain children will outgrow this by the age of 5. And even with peanut, it's about 20% will outgrow their allergy. Again, this is the body figuring out how to turn on the immune system in a healthy manner to either prevent or to retrain itself so it doesn't attack foods. So with those understandings, we believe that we'll be able to develop novel therapeutic approaches that will mimic, what the body's doing to either train it right from the beginning, or in the case of individuals who have food allergy, to truly retrain it to induce what we would call stable immune tolerance or stable, durable, long-term sustained unresponsiveness to food allergens in the absence of having to take that particular food on a regular basis. So I think that's one insight. And I think the other major insight that we've gained is insights around the gut microbiome. So for every cell you have in your body, you have more bacterial and viral cells in your GI tract. And those bacteria in your GI tract are those are what really train the immune system. That's what educates the immune system. It starts right day one of life. You're born with a relatively sterile gut and a relatively, uneducated immune system. But they work in a symbiotic relationship where those microbes, those what we call commensals, those healthy microbes that reside in the gut, teach the immune system what's self, what's non-self, what is noxious, what should I respond to, what's a threat, what's not a threat. Food should not be a threat. And that's what the immune system is learning from the microbes that live with us. What we've come to appreciate is that babies today are not being colonized with the microbes that they were colonized in the past. Exactly why this is, it reflects modernization, industrialization. It's probably a combination of the use of antibiotics, C-section delivery, lack of breastfeeding, and so on. The thinking is, can we repopulate the gut microbiome of infants with some of these disappearing microbes that no longer are colonizing our infants today? And these were microbes that were really predominated in the past. So this is almost restoring Mother Nature the way it used to be. So we think between gut microbiome, understanding the immune system, training the immune system, and then we can talk about the skin itself and how allergens are entering through the skin. I think it's also a new understanding that we'll be able to leverage in the years ahead. I'm glad to talk about that as well.
That's incredibly exciting. I mean, well, thank you for giving that overview. And for those that know that I'm involved in the microbiome field, I promise I didn't bring you on to pump up the microbiome field. I think the opposite is almost true. The reason I'm doing it is because of what the things you and I have talked about over these long number of years, addressing just immune health more broadly, infant immune health, and this notion of immune training for chronic disease has been a back and forth conversation that we've had. And the fact that we could apply it or use allergic disease and atopic disease as a model for that really just becomes a compelling case for us to keep going and to keep trying to solve what you just described as a potential solution set in the future. Because that sounds thrilling, I'm sure, to every person out there that has some risk of food allergy in their family. It seems like we all do at this point, that there are going to be ways that we can better manage that, using a science-driven approach for, real preventative and curative solutions.
No, I agree. I think you're right, Nurry. And in fact, I think allergic disease and food allergy specifically are great. And I'll use the word model in quotes, are great models for several reasons. One is, we've seen a marked increase in children developing food allergy over the last 2 to 3 decades. It's more prevalent, it's more severe, it's more persistent. And this is really reflecting modernization. It's not true just in the United States. It's in Australia, rates of food allergy in children are 10% of children in Australia develop food allergy. In the United States, it's about 8%. These are huge numbers. And this is really something that we had food allergy, 30, 40, 50 years ago, but nothing like the numbers we see today. So we know the environment has changed. And we know with respect to the environment, we know the gut microbiome has changed. And we know the gut microbiome is involved in immune training. And we know that food allergy reflects defective immune training. So it's a very logical approach to say, let's restore things, if we can, to the way they were before, retrain the immune system, and hopefully prevent food allergy, as well as atopic dermatitis, and conceivably downstream asthma and allergic rhinitis, the so-called atopic march.
Okay, Dave, we could keep talking about this forever, so I'm going to start opening up the conversation for some Q&A from the audience. You and I will keep talking as well, but one question that just came up that's relevant to what you just spoke about, you mentioned C-sections as one of the things that we've looked at, from a medical perspective, and contributing factors to this role of the microbiome, or this decreased abundance and diversity of the microbiome, as you described. What can you say a little bit more about C-sections and what impact we believe it has?
Sure. So rates of food allergy are increased about 20% with C-section delivery. So that's been demonstrated in very large trials, large epidemiologic studies in Europe. But we know that babies who are born by C-section are not colonized with gut flora. They're colonized with skin flora. So right from day zero, their immune system is being educated in a different manner. In addition, most C-section deliveries, the mother and thus the offspring are exposed to antibiotics. And antibiotics are killing off bacteria that would reside normally in the gut. So these kids are behind the 8 ball right from the get-go. We know that the gut microbiome of C-section babies can remain altered for over 12 months. So it's not just a short-term issue. Thus, targeting C-section babies may become a very attractive approach to preventing some diseases. And there's a lot of interest in such.
Mm-hmm. Meaning not just food allergy, but other diseases.
Not just food allergy, but there are other diseases as well. Absolutely.
Right. I mean, that's kind of the link here with the microbiome and any defect in your immune system. It could be not just food allergy, but many other chronic conditions as well that show up later in life.
Correct.
So related to this, you've talked about microbiome, early food introduction. There's a broad question and a specific one, other than this introduction of allergens, you've touched on microbiome, but what else can people think about or hopefully will we have available in the future to potentially stop and prevent food allergies?
Yeah.
Related question that came up is, will probiotics, could that be beneficial right now if you started using probiotics?
Yeah. So let's talk about, there are 2 questions there. Let's take them one at a time. So another area of interest of the field is the concept that children are being sensitized to allergens through their skin, predisposing to atopic dermatitis, predisposing to food allergy. We know that if a child has atopic dermatitis, about 30% of those children will develop food allergies. And if atopic dermatitis is severe, occurs at an early age, persistent, those numbers can go up to 50 to 60% of those children will develop food allergy. How are they related? They're related because allergens are entering through that porous skin that's being affected by atopic dermatitis. That skin is much more permeable, allowing allergens to enter. In addition, in the face of atopic dermatitis, the skin microbiome changes. It becomes colonized with a bacteria called Staph aureus, which also predisposes to allergic reactions and food allergy. So approaches are being looked at as far as, can we either prevent atopic dermatitis, or if AD has occurred, can we more robustly treat it, especially if it's early and persistent, to prevent downstream food allergy? And there are ongoing trials looking just at that. So the skin is another very interesting target to try, along with obviously immune training, gut, etc., to try to prevent food allergy. So that is being pursued.
So when you think about that early interception, I mean, translating that to a solution, is the thought process that topical solutions could be part of the answer here?
Yeah, and that exactly, and that's what's being tested in clinical trials. Absolutely.
So maybe now touch on probiotics, and the question was also related to prebiotics, and maybe you need to define prebiotics for the audience, if you don't mind.
Okay, so probiotics are the microbes themselves, okay, and prebiotics think of it as an energy source for those probiotics to promote their growth and their colonization and their functionality. And if combined together, a prebiotic and a probiotic, we call that a symbiotic. So we do have probiotics today, and they're widely available over the counter. But in only limited examples has it been demonstrated that those probiotics colonize the gut of adults or of infants. Now, there are some probiotics that are matched to a naturally occurring prebiotic. That naturally occurring prebiotic is breast milk. So what's really fascinating is one of the major components of breast milk are sugars, and they're called human milk oligosaccharides. Oligosaccharides are just long sugars. And in breast milk, there's over 150 of these sugars. And what's fascinating is all those sugars cannot be used by the baby as an energy source. They exist for one reason, and that's to feed microbes. They serve as a prebiotic. So we've evolved in harmony with our gut microbes, at least for babies. And breast milk thus can support the growth of certain bacteria. And if you provide that particular bacteria as a probiotic, breast milk will support that growth, and you can demonstrate good colonization and even changes in the gut with respect to inflammation, etc. So there are new probiotics being developed and have been developed that probably are going to prove to be more effective because they colonize. And yet we still don't have clinical outcomes, and we are, the Healthy Baby Initiative is funding some clinical trials to look at prevention of allergic disease, or impact on decreased risk of developing allergic disease based on feeding babies those types of probiotics that are matched to breast milk in breastfed infants, obviously.
That's fascinating. Are there, are there ways that you could combine other prebiotics in an infant with food so if you have food introduction combined with these prebiotics and other commensal bacteria, I guess, I'm hearing you talk about, an intersection between different solutions that all have some role.
Yeah. So there are several companies developing and manufacturing human milk oligosaccharides to add to probiotics as a way of mimicking what I just spoke about that's happening in breastfed infants. So that's occurring. There are other groups that are developing synthetic sugar-based approaches as substitutes for breast milk oligosaccharides, also as prebiotics. And so you can imagine what the future could look like. I think it's only going to get better and better as far as making sure that what we're providing to the host really has functionality, has clinical effects. There's a lot of hype out there in the probiotic world, but I think that's going to change as we move forward because there's much more science going into the field today than ever before.
Okay, I'm going to lose track of time because, you and I can probably sit here and keep talking about this forever. I'm going to take whatever last questions we have from the audience, but one thing as we do that and close out here, any, not last, but any, parting thoughts that you'd like to give to this community and this audience, as you've described all the things that are possible. You've said it from the start, this isn't easy, but it's the vision and the roadmap seems to be here for us to take. Are there any thoughts or comments for this audience in terms of, what the future holds?
Yeah. I would be optimistic. I think we're at a new inflection point for several reasons. One is I mentioned, the science has never been as robust. I think we have a much better understanding, of disease. Number two, I think the recent FDA approval of Palforzia, the Aimmune product for allergy immunotherapy, in this case, oral immunotherapy, I think it's an important milestone. It really is the first time we have an FDA approved product. It really, I think, in many ways has galvanized the field. Is it the end game? No. We're going to improve upon it. We're going to go for durable, sustained unresponsiveness or immune tolerance. But I think it's a very important milestone and stepping stone. And I think, I think it's worth just stepping back and applauding all that were involved in that and conducting very large sized trials because I think it will, alter the field. I think the third thing I would point out is just the public awareness of food allergy today. This is really an epidemic. The number of individuals on a daily basis that are having anaphylactic reactions, the number of emergency room visits, the cost to society, the cost to payers, and so on. I think we're becoming more aware of this as a society, and I think that will help catalyze efforts in this field as well. So I'm optimistic on all counts. In addition, I think we're going to develop. I'm really excited by the fact that FAIR is looking for alternatives to oral food challenges. I think that's really an exciting development on the part of FAIR, and I think that will really help with respect to diagnosing food allergy, but it'll also help with respect to conducting food allergy trials, which would be so important to get other companies in the game. And I'm also elated by the fact that we're seeing new investigators jump into this field that we hadn't seen before. And I think that's another major accomplishment on the part of FAIR and in other groups, FASI and many, FASI's really been at the lead on this as well, getting new investigators working on food allergy. So I applaud all the foundations, all the nonprofits working on this, and I applaud all the investigators, the basic science researchers, the clinical researchers, because without them, we would not have anything to translate. We would not have the progress we have today. So
thank you for saying that. And I would just say the same thing from a parent's perspective and thanking all of those same individuals. I want to, there's a lot of questions for you. So you're in high demand here. So I'm going to continue with two and end here. One that's more related to maybe the current day and age. Can you speak about anything that related to allergies and vaccines? So is there anything that this population of parents should be thinking about as we go into obviously COVID vaccine, administration and, just ongoing vaccine development in the future?
Yeah, right now, there are no contraindications for somebody receiving a COVID vaccine because of food allergy. And I think what you're going to see is obviously we're immunizing adults. We're down to age 16. One needs to appreciate that the companies are conducting trials in older kids. They'll ratchet it, will move down in a cascade-like manner to younger kids, to very young kids. I think it's important that everybody receive a COVID vaccine. It's not a contraindication if you have a food allergy.
Thank you for saying that.
And then I will say, I think we will see food allergy vaccines, just like we have infectious disease vaccines. I think we'll have these tolerogenic vaccines targeting food allergy, and there's several companies moving in that direction as well. So, and in fact, some of the technologies that have been developed for COVID have now been applied to autoimmune disease, multiple sclerosis, and it wouldn't surprise me we see them applied to the allergy arena as well.
And you're talking about mRNA specifically.
Exactly. Exactly.
I know, it's really exciting. One of the other comments though, and I'll speak for you, I think, because I know the answer. Everything we've been talking about has been disease interception, prevention. I mean, that's been the focus of this conversation. I think it's safe to say the limit of the innovation doesn't stop there. Older patients who are afflicted on a chronic basis will see some benefit from these innovations as well, whether they're as impactful, but there will be improvements to care based on this science. Am I reflecting your thoughts accurately?
Yeah, let's get specific. So I think when we talk about vaccines, we can think about vaccines as preventive vaccines that would be used at the time of, let's say, interception when someone's sensitized, or to cure. Okay, and you can have curative vaccines. But in addition, as we think about the gut microbiome, there are efforts right now combining allergy, oral immunotherapy with, these are research studies, with gut microbiome targeting approaches, asking the question, can you make OIT safer, faster, and more effective? More effective in the sense of increasing rates of durable, sustained responsiveness. So we're beginning to combine gut microbiome with OIT. And I think we're going to see more and more of these kind of combination approaches. And it makes a lot of sense because the gut microbiome is targeting the immune system and OIT is targeting the immune system. And together, the thinking is they'll be synergistic and you'll have a more effective approach.
Mm-hmm. Okay, well, we are way over time here. I just want to thank you for everything that you've done within the field of pediatric immunology, what you've done in other disease areas, specifically type 1, what you are doing now here within the world of atopy and allergy. Your leadership is incredibly valuable and I think exciting to everyone to see people like you caring about this disease area and not just caring, but going out and making a difference. So thank you for everything that you're doing. And thank you to the World Without Disease Accelerator movement within Janssen, because that's exciting that such a powerful organization is behind, this kind of innovation.
Well, Nurry, thanks. Let me say, it's been a pleasure and a privilege to do everything I've done in my professional life. So thank you.
Well, it's always been a pleasure, Dick, to know you and to work with you and to call you a mentor professionally. So I really appreciate the time. And on behalf of FAIR, thank you for sharing everything that you did today.
Thank you.
All right. Until next time, thank you.
Okay.
Bye-bye.